The short story for my seminar is What Saffi Knows.
So What Saffi Knows is a title that kind of suggests that there's automatically something that she is aware of that no one else is. And in paragraph 9, Saffi makes a point that she is very observant, saying as a child she noticed things and she took things in, and to this day she can't decide, is this a curse or a gift? So observations can also lead to being knowledgeable in some areas, and Saffi's name has the meaning of wisdom, and this was clarified in paragraph 10 as her name was said to come from a book of names and meanings. So with these points, it seems clear that the title What Saffi Knows refers to her wisdom and observations, and a few other points are that she notices Arthur Dodsley is not away very often, and it says in paragraph 14, she whistled to him softly as if he were a wild thing. She had to be careful, since he'd got the bird boy. Arthur Daisy never stayed away for long. He'd drive off, and then almost at once he was back, slamming his door and pounding up his front steps. Before he got that far, though, Saffi would have to scramble through the hedge, her hair catching in the branches, so that she'd have to give it a cruel tug. But she'd never cry or utter at least the least sound, and at least she was home free, because he was never gone long because he had something to hide. For symbols, I found that the basement and the turtle dove were most frequently talked about, and that the turtle dove symbolizes freedom, and the basement is pretty much a cage, and it relates to a story that my mom has at home by May Angelou, called I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It's about the happiness a bird has soaring through the sky, but when the bird's been caged, its feet tied and the wings clipped, the caged bird fights it, but even though it's scared, it still sings its freedom song. So the boy in the basement is the turtle dove, and in paragraph 13, Saffi says he was awake but sleeping, his arms twitching, his feet curled like a bird's claw on a perch. All she could see in the dim light was his hair, nearly white. He's wearing a pair of shorts. She called him the bird boy. Then again in paragraph 22 to 25, Aunt Loretta reads to Saffi. It says, when Aunt Loretta finished the housework, she called Saffi inside to read her a story about a turtle dove. I know what that is, Saffi said. I seen a turtle dove in the cellar at Arthur Daisy's house. Aunt Loretta said she must have seen some other kind of bird. All we have around here are pigeons, she said. You know what a pigeon looks like, don't you? And it's saw, not seen. It looked like a boy, Saffi said. It had white feathers on its head. It sang like this, cheep, cheep, cheep. The turtle dove usually symbolizes freedom, but in this story, it's trapped in a cage, the cage being Arthur Dodsley's basement, and he painted the windows black so nobody could see the boy. The cage and the turtle dove symbolize the trapped freedom, and the innocence of the boy who was last seen biking and carrying comics relates to the bird soaring in the sky, but then it was snatched up and hidden away in the basement. Saffi softly sings or whistles to the bird as the song of freedom, although he is imprisoned, and that's how it relates to the May Angelou story, but it also symbolizes caged freedom like she talks about. So for relationships and growth, there are two main relationships that are really important, and it's mainly between Saffi and her father. They have a very strong relationship, and they joke around a lot. In paragraph 32, it would say, Daddy's girl, her daddy said, sweeping Saffi off her feet, holding her high above his head, shaking her as if she were a cloth doll, her hair flopping in her eyes, and she'd laugh so hard she thought her sides would split open, and the stuffing would fall out. I'll knock the stuffing out of you, her daddy said when he was angry, but he was just teasing. He was never angry with her. She was his girl. He tossed her in the air and caught her safely every time. His fingers dug hard into her ribs, and she couldn't breathe. And then the other relationship that kind of ties into this is with Aunt Loretta and her father, because Aunt Loretta and her father joke around like kids, and that's exact wording in page 30, in paragraph 31. They fought like kids, the way kids went at each other, hands on their hips, face thrust forward. Then they'd agree to an armistice and sat in the kitchen table and had a glass of beer together. But after her father threw her in the air, her aunt would say, can't you see she's had enough? And it was just a joking relationship between them all, especially when the mother was away at work providing for the family because the father couldn't. And Saffi grew a lot throughout that as well, because she used to be a small, scared child, and she grew up to be able to joke even more with her father. And she also was able to watch, like, literally watch people and observe them very, very well. And that's where her name, Wisdom, ties in with the title, right? Hero journey, the call to adventure. It's usually a problem or challenge that starts the hero's adventure that he or she needs to overcome. So in What Saffi Knows, the call is Eugene Dexter going missing. He's one of 2 boys to go missing. The other boy is not discussed, but no one had ever gone missing in this town, and 2 of them were taken in 2 weeks. So the town is in a bit of commotion for they're searching for the kids, but Saffi knows where one of them is. She can't exactly talk to anybody about it because no one's going to believe her. So that's where her personal problem began. She started wondering why he was there and what she could do to help him. The refusal of the call happened next, and it's exactly how it sounds. It makes an attempt to ignore the problem due to fear, and for Saffi, she tries to ignore the basement and the boy, but dreams of him haunt her. And in paragraph 41, she says, behind her in the house there was a bird boy, crouched in the cellar eating crumbs from the palm of his hand. She saw him like that in her dreams. She couldn't get rid of him. The key in that quote is that she couldn't get rid of him, even though she has tried to. Saffi is also scared of the man in the house, Arthur Dawsley. She would sneak through the hedge to peer through the small star-shaped hole in the window painted black to see the boy, but runs away when Dawsley comes home because she isn't supposed to know he's there. And in paragraph 14, it says, Arthur Daisy never stayed away for long. He'd drive off, and at almost once he'd be back, slamming his car door and pounding up the front steps. But before he got that far, Saffi would have scrambled through the hedge, her hair catching in the branches so that she'd have to give it a cruel tug. But she'd never cried or uttered the least sound. At least she was home free. So she knew he was there, and she was scared because she didn't want to get caught. Nobody's supposed to know about the boy, and that's just where the whole refusal of the call began. So crossing the threshold is where the hero leaves their ordinary world for the first time to start their adventure. And in most cases, the threshold is an obstacle. So usually like prior plans or chores that have to be dealt with before the adventure begins. But for Saffi, it's a literal object, and it's the hedge. And also maybe her parents a little bit, because she has to get around them to be able to go over to Arthur's house to see the boy. But like I said in the refusal with paragraph 14, she has to run back and forth through the hedge without getting her hair caught, and like it's painful for her, but she has a lot of fun seeing this boy and trying to figure out like the mystery behind him. So the approach is the setbacks cause the hero to try a new approach and try different ideas. So Saffi first started trying to tell her Aunt Loretta when she was reading her a story about the bird boy and try and compare the bird boy to the turtle dove in the story. And that didn't work, so her aunt told her she was a silly girl. But then in paragraph 47, her mom was speeding and got pulled over. She knew, and it says, Saffi says, she knew she should have talked to the police officer. He was right there beside her mother's car. She could have said, wait, I know where he is. I know where he's hiding. Please listen. But she remained in her seat, glued to the upholstery, the heat making her sweaty and numb. She hated herself. Stupid Saffi. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? And the cat got your tongue is what affected me the most, is because Arthur Dawsley says that to her all the time. When she doesn't answer his questions, he says to her, what, the cat got your tongue? And I think he's affected her more than she thinks, because he's really scaring her. And the boy in the basement being kept there, like, she's trying to figure out how to fix this, but Dawsley's fear that he struck her with is just holding her back. So for my first theory, I decided to discuss reader response, and my experience is similar to this story. So I find that this short story reminds me of broken relationships, mainly because the father and mother split, but more so it reminds me of growing up around people that I'm not 100% comfortable being around. And I'm not going to identify anyone, but there's a certain individual who I avoid constantly due to the fact that they try to insert themselves into my personal business and into my life. And although I've discussed my issue with people, I still find myself being told that it's just how that person is, and I should just ignore it the best I can. This relates to Saffi's issue with Arthur Dawsley, where in paragraph 15 she says, if Arthur Daisy didn't have didn't drive away in his car, if he happened instead to be working in his garden and saw her playing outside, he'd call to her, "Well, Saffi, what do you think I've got today?" He kept calling to her. "Your friend Arthur Daisy," her daddy would tease. And it's not anything literal right there, but you can tell she feels uncomfortable around him because she knows that he's hiding a kid in his basement, and he's really trying to hide him as he painted the windows black. And it's not something he talks about either. So I find that Arthur Dawsley relates to the person in my life that I try to avoid, but I'm still stuck having to deal with them every day. So the other theory I decided to discuss was feminism, and the main points I wanted to talk about relationships between men and women, but also how the male and female roles are defined. The relationships tend to be equal, so the men are the father figures, women are the mother figures. There isn't really anything complex about it until there's marital issues, and that comes up after paragraph 50 when the parents split because the father was laid off work and was just being lazy. He would drink and take his painkillers and just sit around the house all day, and the mom would be off working, so she had the role of the provider while the father didn't do anything. But the male and female roles are kind of defined as the men seem to be the bad guys or the ones that are suspicious. So the proof of this is Mr. Dawsley being suspected by a young cop of kidnapping Eugene Dexter. And this cop says not everyone appreciated him. A young cop by the name of Alex Walters gave him a holler, exasperated stare and considered asking him why he was so darn curious and where he'd been exactly on the afternoon young Eugene Dexter was last seen, wearing his blue cotton jacket and carrying his comic books. So, Mr. Dawsley is obviously in question, but they never actually questioned him. But also, Saffi's father is a little bit of an alcoholic who uses beer to wash down painkillers. And then women play the role of leaders. So Aunt Loretta cooks and cleans for Saffi's family while Saffi's mom is away. And her mother is also the caregiver. She provides for the family, and she works for BC Telephone Company on Fitzwilliam Street. It was her first job since she had gotten married, her first real job ever. If she had to choose, she wouldn't leave Saffi every day, but the truth was, she had no choice. She needed the extra income. She'd lost interest in being poor for her entire life. She ran up some dresses from work on her old shuttle sewing machine, dark blue dresses in rayon and serviceable poplin. Something she said she could gussy up with a little white collar or a string of pearls. And that was paragraph 18. So her mom does take the role of being the provider through the years, especially after her father was laid off. Theme 1 is deception. So Dawsley has the entire town tricked. He shows up to the search party to offer moral support because he's too old to help much in the search. But he has his cellar windows painted black, and Saffi can see the boy. And the boy matches the description that everybody keeps hearing on the radio of white blonde hair, wearing shorts when he was last seen. And Saffi saw him wearing shorts. It says that in paragraph 13. His feet curled up like bird's claws on a perch. All she could see in the dim light was his hair, nearly white. He was wearing a pair of shorts. She called him Bird Boy. But the only other person besides Saffi who seems to question Dawsley is Alex Walters. He's a young cop who gave him a hollow, exasperated stare and considered asking him why he was so darn curious and why where he had been exactly on the afternoon that Eugene Dexter was last seen, wearing a blue cotton jacket and wearing his shorts and carrying 2 Marvel comics. But the cop kind of pushes that back afterwards because he's like, okay, he's an old man, he's not going to be able to do anything. But Dawsley has the entire town tricked, so that is one of the main themes that I have found. Another theme would be isolation, and it's obvious why isolation would be a theme because the boy is trapped in the basement. But also, Saffi seems pretty isolated with her family. Her mother's never there 'cause she works. Her father leaves them. Her aunt is the only other person that is discussed in here. And then there's the neighbor, but the neighbor freaks her out so much. But the boy in the basement is the most isolated because he was a free kid, and you don't know why he is there. So the main theme is trapped, isolation, those sort of things.